Everybody in the Bay Area. It is 11 o'clock, and good evening, everybody who is watching us from Europe. I'm Martin Rauchbar. I'm the co-director of Open Austria, and this is our first Open Salon. This is a new series, a new format in difficult times that we are starting in the midst of the Corona crisis. A new format that Open Austria is trying out, and we're really happy for those of you who have registered and are joining us live on this webinar, on this first Open Salon. We are also recording this, and the webinar is going to be about 60 minutes or around 12 o'clock here Pacific time, but we might also be a little bit over time today because we have a lot of guests in our first salon. Of course, for those of you who are participating, you can also ask us questions. There is a Q&A sections where you can just write down the questions to all of our guests. And to my left, you are seeing already Felicitas, one of our team members. She's the communication manager here at Open Austria, and she will be your advocate during our Open Salon, asking the questions that you are writing to us, and will help us also manage our many guests. So why are we doing this Open Salon? Well, first of all, as you can imagine, we are here in San Francisco. We cannot go to our office. We cannot continue, as so many others, our events, our normal planning. We're all confined to our homes. So we thought we'd go in this direction of creating something online, like so many others of us due to the crisis. San Francisco, the Bay Area, is one of the hotspots in California, and the United States has become, unfortunately, also one of the global hotspots of this global Corona pandemic. So we thought we want to show presence. We want to experiment a little bit with a new format, which we're going to not only do today, but which we're going to do in the future. So we're looking forward to many open salons. And we want to explore in this format the current crisis, of course, in particular today, but also the future. What is going to happen after this crisis? We're going to invite thinkers from both Austria, Europe, and also Silicon Valley, which is where we are based. And we're going to talk a little bit about that with Clara Blum towards the end of our webinar, what we want to do with Open Salon. And then, of course, today in particular, we want to serve our community. Open Austria started in 2016 with the mission to connect Austria and Silicon Valley. And we are here based in the San Francisco, in usually normal times in a co-working space, and doing a lot of events, bringing people together, networking. That's really our mission. And that's very difficult at the time of a pandemic where, of course, people cannot meet. We are all in our homes, and this is therefore for us an opportunity to try out new forms of bringing people together, bringing discussions, bringing new topics to you, our community. And those of you who are still in the Bay Area, I'm talking about Austrians who didn't yet leave the country, but you're here in the Bay Area and you're tuning in today to our first salon. I wanted to give you this opportunity also to ask your questions, your main concerns, and your questions to the ambassador. We have our first guest is the Austrian ambassador in Washington, D.C., but we also have the Austrian consul in Los Angeles of the Consulate General of Los Angeles here, and many more guests. So if you have any questions, any concerns to the Austrian official representatives, here in the Bay Area, this is a good opportunity to ask them, as we have very competent people here. And we're going to start now with a small poll, a small survey, where we ask you what are your main concerns. It's anonymous and it's a multiple choice, so you can name a few of your concerns. Felicitas is going to start the poll right now. What are your main concerns? Giving us a little bit of an idea. Is it getting sick? Obviously, it might be all of them. Maybe some of you are concerned about some things more than about others. And while you're finishing with the first poll, I would like to introduce our first guest, Ambassador Martin Weiss. He arrived relatively recently in the United States, in Washington, D.C. I think it was in November of last year. But he's by no means a stranger to the United States. He was ambassador before he came here to Israel. But before that, he was a while ago the Consul General of Austria in Los Angeles. So welcome, Martin. Welcome back virtually to California for the moment. I'm sure when things calm down again, you will pay us a visit in person as well. Welcome to our first open salon, Martin. We are finishing now the opinion poll. And Felicitas, can you give us a little bit of update? What are people's big concerns?
Well, to give you a quick overview, people are very concerned about the healthcare system. So that's definitely a topic I think we should talk about a little bit. Certainly also the economy in general. So the impact this will have on, I guess, our jobs, our companies. And of course, another very important one is people being concerned about their loved ones getting sick.
Yeah, absolutely. That hardly comes as a surprise. Martin, I will start asking you. I know you've been incredibly busy over the last weeks helping Austrians all over the United States. Some of them needed desperately to go home. Others want to stay here. But let's maybe start with talking a little bit about the situation in Austria. Austria is, of course, also a country hugely affected by the coronavirus. Could you give us a little bit a picture of the situation in our country?
Well, the situation in Austria, if anyone follows, as of today, we have approximately 11,500 persons infected by the coronavirus. Austria has taken steps quite early on in the crisis. It was on March 15 that the country was pretty much locked down. And in the last days, we've seen somewhat of a flattening of the curve of new infections. So the situation is serious, as in so many other countries. There are concerns. Do we have enough ventilators? Do we have enough beds in our hospitals? Do we have enough beds in intensive care? And. So it's a serious situation. But I feel that in Austria, by and large, the population is actually following the rules quite well. They take it very seriously. The government leads with a lot of information and with a lot of early on decisions through the crisis. And as I said, yesterday evening we had a speech by our president urging Austrians to basically stay the course in this difficult time. But there is a little bit of light at the end of this tunnel right now.
That's good to hear. I would like to also ask you a little bit to compare the situation here in the United States. If we start thinking about San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area, we were also relatively early within the United States. I think it was a few days after Austria that the shelter-in-place order was issued in San Francisco and the surrounding counties. And then other regions in the United States followed through. If you compare the big picture between the United States and Austria, is it similar or are there big differences?
Well, some things are similar. For example, if you look at the economic stimulus package that has been passed by the US Congress and the one that has been adopted by the Austrian government, they are actually quite similar in size. Each of the programs is equivalent of approximately 10% of the GDP. So basically, you can say both governments have really pulled out all the stops to keep our economies afloat. So in that sense, there is a similar approach when it comes to the economy. On the other hand, if you look at the overall decision to lock down the country, this is of course a different thing in a country like Austria with 9 million inhabitants and the United States, which is a continent really. So there I see big differences. And I understand that this is of course a very complicated question in the United States. However, it's something that in this crisis is probably unavoidable to take an overall approach. Just if I give you an example, yesterday I saw a story by a journalist in China who wanted to travel from Hong Kong to Beijing for his work reasons. In Hong Kong, when he went to the counter of his airline, every single person working at the counter was wearing full protective gear. His temperature was measured at the counter twice. When he got on board the plane, again, every steward and stewardess, full protective gear. A temperature measured again twice on the plane. Upon landing in Beijing, he was questioned by healthcare authorities. Again, temperature measured, and. This is when you travel from one spot in China to another. Shows you how 100% serious this crisis is taken. If you compare this to the United States, I mean, you can still, even with a stay-in-place order, you can still board a plane in San Francisco and travel to New York tomorrow and travel to Miami. That's all still possible. And that, I think, will really be a big issue in the future. But when I compare Austria and the United States, it's an easier thing to do in Austria. But in Austria, our whole country has pretty much been shut down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we talk about the picture and the different approaches, we definitely have to look at Asia, which is taking in somewhat different approaches there. There's one of the new things that the Austrian government introduced just recently, and that is the masks. That kind of asking its citizens to wear masks. When you enter the shops and the grocery stores, people are asked to wear masks. Do you see this happening in the United States as well?
Well, I don't know about you, how the situation is in the Bay Area. In Washington, D.C., I see it happening quite a bit more. A lot of people are wearing masks now on the streets, in supermarkets. So I think it's going in that direction. And the reasoning behind it is not so much that you protect yourself through the mask, because you have to have a very particular mask to really be protected from the coronavirus. But a mask will protect others, because if you are coughing, then your cough will be caught in your mask and it will not be airborne. So it's really, it shows that you kind of think of others and you kind of show your solidarity. And I think it's certainly going in that direction. It's not for us, it's something that it's not typical to our culture. It's not typical to American culture, but it just might be a time where it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. And if it's of course not always easy to get hold of these masks, but if you can somehow get hold of one, or even if you just use a makeshift mask, it's better than nothing. That's, I think, what our government is telling our citizens back in Austria. So I think the discussion, and I've seen a lot of it here in the Bay Area in California, going in that direction as well. Let's talk about the repatriation effort. Austria also was on the forefront there, starting very early to urge its citizens that were traveling, the tourists, people that were in other countries short-term, to come home and to come home as soon as possible. Can you tell us a little bit about these tremendous efforts, also you and your team together with the consulates in Los Angeles, in New York, and we helped there a little bit as well. Can you tell us a little bit about this repatriation effort as far as it concerns the United States?
Well, by and large, this is an effort that is a worldwide effort by the Austrian Foreign Ministry. It's something that we have never done at all in this magnitude. Basically, we want everyone to come home. The reason is simple. At home, you have a network, you have a family, you might know your doctor, you know your healthcare system, you're certainly insured. So there are many reasons why you might be better off when you're at home. So that's why Austria asks everybody to come home if you can and recommend to do that. In the United States, as of now, there are still commercial flights available that'll get you into Europe. There are no direct flights to Austria, but you can get into Europe and then on to Austria. But we have had one particular flight that took off from Washington, D.C. About 10 days ago, and it was offered to the Austrians, and it was filled to capacity. On this flight, there were, for example, approximately 40 high school students, because their high schools had pretty much closed by that time, and there was no reason for them to stay in the United States anymore. And Austrians who traveled for many other reasons. For the time being, the efforts are kind of concentrated by our foreign ministry towards regions in the world where it's impossible to catch a flight. If you are in the Philippines, if you are in Indonesia, it's very, very complicated to travel. So now the flights are going to destinations where you do not have any possibilities to fly. In the United States, we are still telling everyone, use the opportunity. There are commercial flights available, much less than there had been before, but there still are. And I think this is where we are at the moment. If there will be an additional direct flight to Vienna, I cannot say right now. It's possible, but there is nothing is planned right now.
Yes, and I think that's what you just said about using commercial flights to get to Austria. That's also true here for the Bay Area. At least yesterday, it was still true that you could fly with United Airlines to Germany, either to Frankfurt or Munich. I'm going to talk to Joseph later on about this. And there is a way from Germany to get to Austria. So that's probably a very easy way, a relatively easy way to get back home. Just last question, do you expect more repatriation flights? There was one last week, as you mentioned, from the United States, or is this for the moment, you think most people who wanted to go home or needed to go home are home?
I think that is pretty much the case. We kind of constantly compare notes with the State Department because they have an overview of how many Austrians have entered the United States, for example, with ESTA, and how many have left again. So this number is definitely dwindling. So most who wanted to take a flight have done so. As I said, I don't foresee a flight to Austria in the immediate future. Might happen in the future, but as of now, our advice is if you feel you should go home, and we feel that there are many good reasons that you might want to do so, take a commercial flight. It's possible to go home.
Lastly, Martin, how are you dealing personally with this? I've watched your efforts, your team, sometimes working really 24/7, getting all these Austrians who needed help back home. How are you doing personally? Is the Washington, D.C. area affected badly? How's the situation there, and how are you going about your daily job?
Well, our daily job has changed, of course. Most of the embassy team works from home. We do a lot of Zoom video conferences. We really have try to do this social distancing and also to play by the rules, because Washington, D.C. has issued an order that only essential workers should go to their jobs. And we also have cut down on personnel that needs to come to the embassy. So that is the one thing. Other than that, you know, the good thing about Washington as compared to New York is, of course, that you have more space. There is just more landscape, more greenery, more parks. I mean, it's easier to get outside. And my dog is a very happy dog these days. He gets walked a lot. So by and large, I think our situation is comparably okay. But I think, and that's true for you and that's true for all of us, if we look at the numbers, those numbers are dramatic and they are rising. And I think many people are concerned and have a good reason to be concerned. And we just try to do our job as well as we can.
Well, thank you so much, Martin. There are a lot of questions actually, but they're very specific to Austrian residents here in California or Austrian businesses. So we will talk about it at a later stage with our other guests. But I wanted to thank you. You're a very, very busy man for giving us all this time. We hope to actually really receive you back in California, where you were Consul General in Los Angeles for many years. Very soon, when all of this is hopefully over or in some ways possible again. Thank you again, back to Washington, D.C., and hope to looking forward for continuing our collaboration.
Yeah, same here. Thank you very much for doing this. Thank you. It's a great idea to have this salon. It's good to be with you, at least on this platform, hopefully one day in the future, in the not too distant future, physically. I gotta run. Great to be with you. Gotta rescue some ostriches. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I'm going to now hand over to Felicitas for a while, who is going to present the second poll that we're going to ask you. What are the questions there? And please tell us a little bit about what we're asking you, because now we're going to talk about the needs and the questions of our community here. Felicitas?
Yes, the poll is launched, so I hope people should be seeing it. I'm still waiting for more folks to participate, so let's give it just a minute.
And while you are answering the questions of our second poll, I would like to invite our second guest, Sonja Schmer-Galunda, who is an Austrian citizen, resident here in San Francisco, actually only a few blocks away from my house, as we recently discovered. And you are a scientist, a social anthropologist, but you're working also in this capacity for a tech company, Smart Information Flow Technology, as a senior research scientist. And I know you are at home at the moment, you have kids, and with your husband who works also for a major tech company here. So a good example of how our Austrian community resident here in the Bay Area is doing. So I would like to ask you, how are you personally? How have you been doing over the last weeks, dealing with all the challenges, homework, looking after the kids, home office, getting everything together, and also the concerns, of course, for your loved ones and relatives back in Austria?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Martin and Clara and Felicitas, for the opportunity to be the first guest on your first salon. What an honor. Yeah, as Martin said, I am an Austrian in the Bay Area. I've been living here for 3 years. I live in a house, luckily, with a garden on top of a hill, not in a safe neighborhood. When I look out of my home office right now, I see the bay, the East Bay, and I see the Diamond Princess cruise ship parked on it since weeks. How am I doing? It's challenging. The biggest challenge certainly is the psychological one, as it is probably for all of us, not knowing what the outcomes of this crisis is going to be. It's harder than knowing something. I live here with my husband, as you said, who works for Google, and my 2 sons, who are 7 and 9. They have been off school now for 2 weeks. We have been in our home for 4 weeks because we were early adopters of this new lifestyle, due to Google actually putting out recommendations that their employees should stay at home already before the state of California actually implemented some of their recommendations with shelter in place. So I also think it's one of the reasons why San Francisco in particular and the Bay Area is probably a little bit better off, just like Austria, in terms of catching and trying to avoid these huge spikes that we see in other places and in hotspots in this country. It's also, as you said, it's difficult to have your family, my 81-year-old mother in Austria that I worry about, my daughter, my brothers. I talk to them on a regular basis in order to see and make sure that everybody is okay. And everybody is okay so far, which is good. And I also think, actually, I would like to say that here in this forum, that I am actually proud to be Austrian in this moment in time, because I believe that Austria did a lot of things very right in comparison to maybe other nations that haven't taken that threat as seriously. So it feels good to know that my family is taken care of by a government that cares for its people and that puts human life before the interests of an economy. And I know that this is a controversial topic to talk about, because we have to outweigh the consequences of economic downfall. But I heard Bill Gates yesterday actually said something quite interesting, because he was asked on the economic impact, and he said the economy is going to come back, and it might take years for us to have the economy back as it was right now. But human life is not going to come back. And like setting the priorities straight here, I think, is important. And I say that as a social scientist, not an economist. And as that, I also want to say that I think that although this is a crisis, we can also look at this maybe as an opportunity to set some things straight in terms of, correct the course, especially with economic development, because if economic development is so fragile that it just collapses in an instant like that, we maybe want to rethink some things that are more essential than others, and not think about the profit and the capitalist system as much as what's actually best for the people. Now, personally, I'm fine. All in all, as you said, it's challenging to homeschool people and have Zoom meetings at the same time. So my sons are learning a lot of new things on their iPads and phones. The anxiety is starting to go down a little bit, but kicks in once in a while. But all in all, I feel like things are safe.
Yeah, we have just now finished our poll. What are the important needs and questions for the community? And I think the number one is how to get back to Austria. Then people are saying there, of course, I mean, we are in Silicon Valley after all, how to get support for my business. And we're going to talk about that later on. How to renew my Austrian passport and my healthcare insurance. Those are the main topics. Can you see that as well? Do you share some of these concerns? Sonia?
Oh, sorry. I was zooming out. Yeah, so my biggest concern was really, and I think the ambassador actually answered some of that, if something were to happen, could I get back to Austria? So knowing that there's still commercial flights available is actually helpful. God forbid something were to happen to one of the family members and I would need to feel like I need to go back to Austria. However, the question for me, I have the center of my life here in California, but if I want to come back, is that going to be an issue? What about re-entry? As a green card holder, how are the policies of the US conflicting with Austrian policies? I can see that Austria is not going to deny me access to come back home, but I wonder, if I were to come back, is that going to be difficult? And if they ask for 2 weeks of self-quarantine, how and where would I do that? I guess that would be one concern. And then also further down the road, if, again, we don't know a lot of things as to how this is going to go down, but Fauci, for example, said yesterday that we are not even halfway there, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse before it's going to get better. And there's, of course, a risk, and the media writes a lot about the US, how people are buying more weapons, and there's a risk that, of course, there might be riots because economic differences between the people in the US are strikingly larger than in Austria. So there might be a group in the society that might fall through the net. And if that happens, again, I don't know how dangerous would it be. There's, of course, that fear, as well. What would happen, in the US if, people, if riots start, for example, if the situation would get as bad, I guess.
Yeah, so we will ask some of the questions you posed. I think we will best talk to Joseph about how as an Austrian, if you can go back, but can you then re-enter the country? That's I think a very important question, which we will pose to Joseph as well. But I would like to finish with asking you now, not as the Austrian citizen, but as the social anthropologist that works in tech. And you talked a lot about, and I know that you professionally also analyze the pandemic and what it is doing with us as a society. You talked about some of the issues on a bigger scale in the US, but here in the Bay Area, how would you, looking at kind of the behavioral patterns, this very special, unique culture here in Silicon Valley, how is Silicon Valley, how is the Bay Area dealing with the pandemic so far, and what do you expect will happen?
I don't know. That part I don't know. I read this morning in the news that talked at San Francisco UCFS was saying that they are scared to say that we are about to flatten the curve because the numbers are looking relatively good in terms of increases of cases. We have low numbers. And as I alluded to before, I think this is partly due because of tech companies, large amounts of employees, thousands of people that work for tech companies like Google and Facebook that have been early adopters. And there's also certainly personality traits that are maybe more prevalent for people that work in these tech companies that are maybe used to working from home already, because tech companies, for this kind of like home office virtual meetings is not something completely new for tech companies. So it has been maybe an easier transition. It has, as I said, also been started earlier. It's also a very fit population here in San Francisco. You see, I've never seen as many people run up and down the Hill Street that I live on as before. So it's good to know that the population here is healthy and rational and reasonable. That said, as an anthropologist, of course, this is like a very interesting social experiment that we are going through, and it makes sense to compare areas like the San Francisco Bay Area with New York, with other populations in other parts of the world that show different behavioral patterns that might be influenced by belief systems. One example is the outbreak in Iran, where I believe like Muslim Chinese tourists traveled to Iran and then like participated in a ritual where they were licking a shrine. I think 100 of them were all licking the same shrine. And that might have really led to that huge outbreak. Similarly, like very Orthodox communities, or even in the United States, evangelists in the United States here participate in like religious rituals where bodily fluids are exchanged, and that can then lead to an outbreak. And if you can't, while interesting to study, I think we also need like a good understanding of this, so we can develop behavioral approaches or approaches for behavioral change for these kind of communities, so that they are more compliant. In terms of like following rules and then protecting everybody else and not just themselves.
Well, you've touched on an incredible wealth of topics that are crucial in order to tackle this pandemic, and we probably could have an entire discussion about these cultural, behavioral, societal challenges, and we are going to have these kind of discussions in our open salon later on. But for now, I want to thank you, Sonia. Hold out there. I know you're in San Francisco, a few blocks away. Stay healthy. All the best to your family, both at home where you're currently, as well as in Austria. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
So our next guest is going to be talking with us about the many issues and problems Austrians who are here, who are either residents or are staying here longer and are not planning to go home. And this is the Austrian consul in Los Angeles, Joseph Schwob, whom I'm welcoming here to our salon. Hi, Joseph. A quick reminder, Open Austria, of course, formally is a consulate, so I'm the Austrian consul in San Francisco, but for most matters, it is the Austrian Consulate General in Los Angeles the place to go. Of course, in coordination with us and our wonderful honorary consul, Peter Frederickson, we're going to talk to in a moment. But if you need a passport, if you need a visa, Los Angeles is the place to go. And we have received a lot of questions from our participants about the situation, but maybe I would like to start, Joseph, asking you, what has changed for your work? What are the kind of things one can still do in Los Angeles or with Los Angeles, and what are the things for the moment that are not possible for Austrian citizens as well as for non-Austrian citizens?
Hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Martin. Yes, as you said, I'm working at the Austrian Consulate General in Los Angeles. At the moment, our counters for citizenship and passports and visa are closed due to the coronavirus. And very often asked, when will the counters open up again? Well, unfortunately, we don't know that at the moment. So for sure, the next during April, all the counters will be closed. Our counter for emergency passports is open. Yeah, so if any Austrian citizen needs an emergency passport, that's in principle possible to apply for an emergency passport.
Now, I would like to pick up Sonia's question to you, which was really about Austrians who live here and who know they can go back to Austria, but then are worried if they can then re-enter the country. Now, we know that there are certain measures in place by the US government about traveling from Europe into Austria. Could you give us a little bit of an update on what today the situation is?
Yeah, so Austrians who have a green card could, in principle, travel back to the US. Yeah? And yeah, in principle, it's possible. And we don't know what the future will bring, unfortunately. But at the moment, with a green card, it's in principle possible to travel back to the US.
That's, I think, a little bit the problem for us when we are asked for advice, that we can't, of course, really know exactly what measures the government, the US government, even our own government is going to take, because our governments are watching the situation and probably determining those questions when they can see better what kind of course the epidemic is taken. But what are the most important concerns Austrians come up with you? And then we're going to actually look at the questions that participants are asking at this moment. But what are the most important questions you are dealing with on a daily basis?
Yeah, at the moment, one of the most important questions is whether there are still regular flights from the US to Europe. Yes, there are flights. Yeah, so we recommend if Austrian citizens want to fly to Europe, please do it now. From San Francisco, there is still United Airlines operating on a daily basis to Munich. And from Seattle, it's operating Condor to Frankfurt. And Lufthansa is operating flights from New York to Frankfurt and from Chicago to Frankfurt. So those flights are confirmed at the moment. And also we don't know what the future will bring. Yeah? So if you, in your individual situation, you think it might be better to go back to Austria, then please do it now.
Right, I would like to ask Felicitas now, who is screening a little bit the Q&A section and also the chat function. There are a lot of questions about businesses, but with that we'll talk later with one of our colleagues at the Open Austria team. But what are kind of the more consular questions dealing with visas, dealing with passports. Could you give us a few, maybe you tell us a few questions and then Joseph will answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me try and summarize the most pressing questions here. A few of them certainly were regarding the renewal of passports, which Joseph, you already answered. Certainly another question that's quite common is, number one, if you are an American citizen married to an Austrian citizen, are there any restrictions on you traveling with your spouse, with your Austrian spouse, back to Austria? And perhaps you can go ahead and answer those case by case, and then I just keep asking, because otherwise I feel like it might be a lot.
Okay. At the moment, there are travel restrictions for US citizens to the Schengen area. And in principle, only there are some exceptions. The most important exception for US citizens is when they have a residence permit for the European Union, they're allowed to travel to the Schengen area.
Right.
And also if the pilots are accepted and doctors and nurses and in general, there are travel restrictions as a travel ban for US citizens.
One question is not really concerning the US as much as the EU. So can EU citizens who are not Austrians still enter Austria freely?
Well, there are a lot of restrictions now in Europe. And so this is a case-by-case answer because it depends where they want to go. And so let's say there are only a few flights operating to Austria, and it depends. Yeah. So what we know is that Austrian citizens can fly to Germany and take a train there to Austria. So this is possible.
All right. So I think what you said, one thing very, very crucial, which is many of the questions that Austrian citizens or non-Austrian citizens who want to go to Austria have, it's really a case-by-case study, right? So Joseph is incredibly available. I know that because we are almost daily for long times on the phone, talking to each other about these very issues. So if you have a question, if you have a concern, if you have a pressing issue, please contact the Consulate General in Los Angeles. Maybe what is the best way to contact you in these times, in these days?
Yeah, go on our homepage. It's austria-la.org. And there you find a contact formula, and please use it and write us. And we're here for you, for all the Austrians, and try to do our best.
And please register at the Consulate General in Los Angeles. If you haven't done so already, I think that's a very, very useful tool, so that you can be in touch and get all the newest information of the consulate, but also that the consulate can be in touch with you. Is there any last advice you would like to give our citizens in the Bay Area? We don't really exactly know, as there is no obligatory registration of citizens at the Consulate General, but a rough estimate about how many Austrians are actually in the Bay Area, and if you have any advice for them, any that we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, so there are a few thousand Austrians living in the Bay Area, and want to call you, please register. Go to auslandsregistrierung.at. You find the link also on our homepage. And please, another advice is follow the orders of the local authorities. And in general, I had some seminars, and I can tell you that California has a very good crisis management. And yeah, please stay at home, make social distancing, wash your hands, and stay healthy.
Thank you, Joseph. You stay healthy as well in Los Angeles. Regards to the team there at the Consulate General, doing great work, like in DC, often day and night, particularly in the last weeks. Tough times behind, and we are going to manage these things together. And I would like to say thank you to you for joining us and giving us so much of your valuable time. And I would like to now switch to our local hero here, Peter Fredericks, the honorary consul of Austria in San Francisco. He's been honorary consul for many, many, many years in the San Francisco Bay Area. A lot of you know him personally, and he's doing really, really a great job also in this time. So I would like to start asking you, Peter, how you're doing personally. Where are you? How are you doing? How is your family?
Well, thank you for including me. And even before I answer that, I want to say that I think this really underscores the importance of Open Austria and having a local technology presence here, because if there's anything that drives the need for technology, it's going to be a global pandemic. So thank you for including me, and it's just incredibly important what you're doing from my perspective. And then in terms of how I'm doing, you're looking at my home office. The San Francisco Bay is right behind me. I'm up in Marin County. There's too much light though, because this is due east, so I've closed the blinds, but I'm just in my home office, and I'm really fortunate compared to many people to be in nature and still be able to be outside with my kids.
And you've been helping a lot in the last weeks with the repatriation effort together with our colleagues in LA. And of course, I imagine a lot of questions, concerns, some of which you then forward to our colleagues in LA, some of which you can answer. How have you been dealing with all the pressure and all these questions? And what is your general feeling for Austrians here, Austrian citizens here in the Bay Area?
Well, I think we're really fortunate to have such good support in Los Angeles. And the reality is, as you know, Martin, is that you and I can't really do that much directly in terms of assisting people. But I think we've done a good job of triaging things and basically sending people to Los Angeles when they, can benefit from the services there, or informing them that, what other alternatives are in the United States, et cetera. So that's what we've been able to do. And I think Austrians have been very proactive because, again, Austria went into the lockdown pretty early. San Francisco Bay Area did. And so we've been lucky, I think, to be able to help Austrians earlier rather than later.
I want to ask you also, not only as honorary consul, but as a successful businessman in the biotech sphere. You are the chairman of the board of a very successful Silicon Valley startup tech company, FemPulse, that is going to expand also to Austria. And I wanted to ask you a little bit your estimate about the economic effect, maybe particularly on the biomed sector. After all, this is a medical crisis, it's a pandemic. So I imagine that some companies who are working on solutions will probably benefit a little bit. But how is the overall sector doing? How is FemPulse doing?
Yeah, just by way of background, we're so happy to have Martin Weiss now as our ambassador in Washington, because when he was in Los Angeles as the consul general, he's the one who invited me to become honorary consul on the notion that the honorary consul here should have some kind of background in technology, both in Austria and the United States. And we've been very happy to create the Go Silicon Valley program, then have Open Austria come. And now really is a third step to try to have startups from Silicon Valley choose Austria as a hub for their operations. And I thought I would try to set a good example by choosing a company of which I'm chairman in the bioelectronics sphere, FemPulse. And they are in fact going to set up their European hub in Vienna. In terms of what's happening in the biomedical sphere, it's very interesting because there's the notion of what is essential and what is not essential. And so many areas of medical bioengineering are not necessarily essential. So for FemPulse, fortunately, at this point, we're able to continue developing our bioelectronic health platform for women, although there is the danger that we'll be slowed down some because certain of the things we need to do will be considered not essential, and we won't be able to implement them.
For sure. Maybe a general assessment, what you hear about businesses in Silicon Valley and how Silicon Valley is affected, and then we will talk with another Austrian entrepreneur who is also based here in Silicon Valley. What's your general feeling? How is Silicon Valley doing economically with this tremendous challenge?
Yeah, I would say, and I'll be interested to hear what others say of this, that it really depends pretty much on the industry that you're in. I mean, there's no question that the people in Silicon Valley are better equipped than just about anyone else in the world to take advantage of technological solutions. To, you know, Zoom is nothing new for us, you know, video conferencing, whatever it might be. But again, depending on what industry you're in, you simply may not be able to do certain interactions and certain developments and certain work that you would be doing. In general, there's been a huge trend. Silicon Valley started very much as a hardware thing, but there's been such a trend towards software that many companies are able to continue doing their operations in a pretty seamless way.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Peter, for this very interesting assessment. Again, please keep healthy, please keep safe. All the best to your family. And keep up the hard and good work that we are all doing here in these efforts for Austrian citizens here in the Bay Area, Austrian entrepreneurs. Thank you, and talk to you soon in the next days. And our next guest is in fact an Austrian entrepreneur, Emanuel Pirker, who has a company called Stratodesk, and this company is based both in Austria as well as here in San Francisco. Stratodesk, I think the tagline is work anytime from anywhere. So it seems like a good business to have in a time where most people do home office work from home. Hi, Emmanuel. How are you doing personally? How is your family doing? And how is Stratodesk doing?
Hi. So, I mean, we are doing fine. We are here in Silicon Valley, kind of halfway between Palo Alto and San Francisco. Yeah, we play with our 3-year-old in the front yard, in the backyard, outside. So that is fine, that is nice. I'm used to working remotely or working from home. We have always had in our company at least 2 days a week where we all did work from home. I mean, right now it's funny, we pay an office in San Francisco. We also have a second office here in San Carlos because the team has grown and you know, the commuting situation is so bad. And so we have these offices and nobody can go there. So that's interesting. Generally speaking, our business is fine. I mean, you already said it. We are in this business of remote work, of having computing resources somewhere and the actual person working somewhere else. So that is perfectly fine. The crisis is actually beneficial for that kind of segment. I hate to say it, but so many companies who have just reluctantly adopted such a strategy, they are now pushing all the turbo buttons to go further. So that is pretty fine. I mean, you can probably see I'm not giving you a very happy expression because of the overall situation, but I think it is a very narrow answer to your question about how I am.
And maybe not all that representative of most companies, but even you said yesterday when we talked in preparation of our open salon, that the near-term picture looks good, but of course you're also worried about the mid to long-term effects, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have to keep in mind who is essentially paying our salaries. It's our customers. And who are these customers? It's companies that employ lots of people who need our software to help their workforce work from home. But if these people are these companies are laying off their workforce, they don't need our software anymore. And so I think this is the big thing everyone in Silicon Valley has to think about. Of course, our core business is not affected. We don't need, we are not a restaurant that has to shut down. It's everyone. We provide our services via the internet. That is not the problem. The question is just who will use our services in half a year when half of the country is without a job.
Yes, I can understand that. So some dark clouds for Stratodesk on the horizon as well. And we're going to talk now a bit about the general picture. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Stay healthy, stay safe. All the best to your family and all the best to Stratodesk. But we are now going to turn to my dear colleague and co-director of Open Austria, Georg Fürlinger. Georg and I together were here in San Francisco since the start of Open Austria in 2016. That was really in the midst of the boom of Silicon Valley, where everybody was streaming still into Silicon Valley. A lot of startups from Austria coming here. And now 4 years later, we're in the midst of this global crisis. How would you say is Silicon Valley dealing with Corona, with the global pandemic? What are the kind of the issues which are specific to Silicon Valley, to the tech industry here? And how about Austrian companies who are here either present or who are startups and have kind of looked at, you know, are part of your program, the Go Silicon Valley program? How are Austrian entrepreneurs doing?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Hello, community. It's challenging times, I think, for all of us, also for the Austrian businesses here in the US. We are roughly talking about 700 subsidiaries or some kind of representations from Austrian companies in the total of US. About 170 of them in the western part of the US, mostly in Colorado, but also a lot of them in California, in Silicon Valley. And when we look at the poll that Felicitas shared with us before, about 1/3 of the ones listening to us right now are also had the question how to get support for my businesses. What does it actually mean for my operations? Before I'm gonna maybe lay out some of the initiatives in more detail, I also want to cross-reference that together with our network of trade commission offices in New York, DC, Chicago, LA, as well as with the US Embassy, we just had the ambassador with us, and the regional consulates, we're in touch with many of them, with many of the entrepreneurs and managers, local managers here in the US, and trying to support them as good as we can in these difficult times. They are composed about the situation. They're in a very observant position on how things develop. And yeah, so on this occasion, I want to reference to a webinar given by my colleagues a couple of days ago, talking about the situation in the whole of North America, including Canada and Mexico, and we can share the link to this video afterwards, so I don't have to repeat that content.
Yeah, I've just watched this webinar myself yesterday, and there's an incredible wealth of practical information there from a legal point of view, and kind of very, very good estimates that are really helpful for Austrian entrepreneurs all over the United States, but they are applicable, of course, also here in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. Before I turn to Felicitas, who will maybe has screened a few questions for you, Georg, just a question to you about startups and you know, this very specific ecosystem we have here in Silicon Valley. What are the challenges for startups, for very young entrepreneurs, and I'm talking about the age of the company, that are unique here in this crisis?
I think the biggest challenge is for small companies, whether it's startups or small and medium-sized enterprises, is the limited probably reserves that they are having, depending on when they raised their last round of financing. So cash and reserves might be limited. And in that occasion, I wanted to point out, and my colleague Tony has explained this in the webinar in more detail, but maybe just for the community listening today, about the Paycheck Protection Program that is part of the CARES Act that was presented a couple of days ago. It's part of the federal program and administered by the Small Business Administration. So it's really targeting companies with less than 500 employees worldwide. Just a snapshot, what is it? It's a loan for small and medium-sized enterprises, from startups up to, as I said, 500 employees. A loan up to 2.5 times the sum of monthly wages. So it's depending on the size and the money you pay on your employees. And it's dedicated to be used mainly for running expenses like salaries and rent. The interest rate is 4%. But this doesn't have to be paid for 8 weeks. And the good part, so what is special about it, at the end of June, they're gonna reassess the purpose of use, what you have used that money for. And if it used according to the guidelines, these loans will be forgiven, meaning you don't have to pay them back. So it kind of like transforms into a grant. And additionally to that, that will not count towards your taxable income. So it's really a very good measure to keep your finances afloat. Even though, having said that, the big question is, and my colleague is working with policymakers here to find an answer to that, whether US companies with foreign owners or foreign mother companies are actually eligible to apply. This is still a gray area. We're not too sure about this yet, but as I said, my colleagues in LA are working to find an answer to that, and we like to keep you all informed about this.
This is due to the fact, of course, that the program you mentioned is a program by the US federal government.
Right.
For small and medium-sized businesses, and we are working with our colleagues on LA to find out what this really means for Austrian businesses that are present here, but are also present in Austria. So I turn to you, Felicitas. What are some of the questions for Georg here on the entrepreneurial side?
Well, first and foremost, and this is of course something, Georg, you've already touched upon, is the concern and question about how Austrian businesses in Silicon Valley or in San Francisco and the Bay Area have been affected so far, and also of course what initiatives and resources are there that they can perhaps access to get through these tough times. I think you've covered this mostly, and like in many cases, it's probably best for folks to reach out and have the cases looked at on an individual basis. But also another great question is whether there's any way for American and or European tech companies to aid the efforts in Austria and in the EU. And if so, what would be the right way to go about this?
Right. Yes, we did have some offers to help, and we really appreciate them. And it shows that even though they're miles apart, thousands of miles apart from their homeland, they're still thinking about what they can do to support Austria and to support Europe, but also to support the local community. And as Martin and Peter have laid out before, we kind of like in a middleman role here. We try to funnel the resources in a way that they actually land where they can have the most impact. So we, of course, have very strong ties to our headquarters in Vienna. So we're in regular touch there. Best for the entrepreneurs or for the businessmen and women who have ideas on how to support Austria is to please reach out to us individually, and depending on the offer or depending on their ideas, we will try to find the right person for them in order to go forward and see how we can help.
So the best way to contact us here at Open Austria, whatever your needs, whatever your questions are, you know, our mission is to connect Austria with Silicon Valley. If we don't have the answer, we know who does have the answer. We have an extensive network, the Trade Commission in Los Angeles, in New York, in DC, in many other places, and of course also our colleagues of the consulates in different places in the United States. So please send us an email, contact@open-austria.com. That's a very easy way to contact us, and with any kind of questions, Georg will be, if they're business and entrepreneurial related, Georg will be happy to help you. Thank you, Georg. I hope, again, we haven't seen each other for a while physically, that you're doing well with your lovely family here in San Francisco. Thanks a lot, and goodbye for now.
Thank you, Martin.
I'm going to resort now to another member of the Open Austria team, Clara Blum, who's Deputy Director here at Open Austria and Head of the Arts, Science and Technology program. Clara, it was your idea to come up with the Open Salon, and you coined the term. It's a series for explorers and I think pioneers. So what did you have in mind when you started up with this concept? We are here in the backdrop in this beautiful kind of 19th century old-fashioned backgrounds to mimic, even if only virtually, a salon. What's the idea behind it, and what do we really want to achieve with it?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Congratulations to the both of you. This is going smoothly so far, so very well done. I'm absolutely impressed. Yeah, so I think we designed the Open Salon as you already mentioned, mimicking a traditional historic salon in the tradition of the Viennese Salon, where we should gather as a community and also invite experts to inform us on certain topics. And so we came up with the tagline of a conversational compass for explorers and pioneers, which of course is in and of itself our community. They're all explorers and pioneers in a way, because they went west to explore and discover their ideas. And also we want to bring thinkers and explorers of their own to this conversation, to the table, to maybe envision the future after Corona, to help us through this time of crisis, to give us guidance, to be some sort of a compass, a guiding star. And I think we can all use or draw on these visions of the future to inspire hope and confidence in whatever is ahead of us.
So there will be a lot of interesting topics, obviously, some of related with Corona and its impact on our societies, future impact on our future societies, but not all of them will be about Corona. But I would like to also ask you something a little bit talking about our work here at Open Austria. So it's one of our focus points is to focus on this intersection of arts and technology. And you've been leading this effort, not just for Austria, but for Europe. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also how it's been affected by the current crisis?
Yeah, I think the creative industries as a whole have been affected greatly by this crisis and by the shelter-in-place order. Out of, first of all, the obvious effects, which is with no community gatherings, most of the art scene is basically dialed down to zero. But also the trickle-down effects, which are, of course, economic implications. So art is usually considered a luxury in our society. So we are expecting severe cuts of public funding for the arts. And I'm expecting to see how our government is going to react on this. Usually we have a tradition of preserving the arts and seeing it as a sanctuary for our culture. And so historically we've been dealing well in these situations of crisis. So I'm actually confident that there are already measures in place to help artists overcome this time of crisis. I actually fear for the local art scene a lot. They're struggling because most of the revenue comes from live performances and drawing on people and customers. So there will be a huge influx, and I think we can expect that some of those organizations are not going to be alive at the end of the year. So this is just a dire perspective, just another collateral of the situation we're dealing with currently. But on a positive note, when it comes to our work reality, I think as a European representation here in Silicon Valley, we're trying to pivot, and we're trying to see how we might be able to transform some of our activities and translate them into the virtual space. Not all of this is going to be satisfactory, so some of the performances are simply going to be canceled, but other can definitely be translated to the virtual reality. And we're also interestingly in close contact with some of the major platforms to see what kind of tools they're going to be developing and deploying in the months to come to bring communities together. So going beyond the usual YouTube and Twitch and Facebook live streamings, but maybe come up with a tool that can be a lesser but yet a substitute for reality.
And I mentioned before that you're doing this not only for Open Austria, for Austria, bringing together the worlds of arts and technology from Austria and Silicon Valley, but also for other partners, mainly from Europe. And you're also the president of our local unique cluster, which is a European cluster with other European partners that really work very much on bringing Europe and Silicon Valley, the tech industry, the artists, and the creative worlds together. Can you talk a little bit just about those efforts and how they are affected by Corona?
Yeah, maybe just very short, because maybe you can even have one salon dedicated to this topic. But we actually won a grant by the European Commission at the beginning of this year. Very excited times for us indeed. Very ironic that this should come to take place exactly in this moment in time. And yet we grow with challenges. So our 20 events that we had scheduled for 2020 will most likely be decimated to at least 50% of our scheduled activities, if not less. But our bigger mission statement is to humanize technology through the arts and try to create a link between the worlds of art and tech, and really help shape technology in a positive way, in a more humanist way. And this is our mission as Europeans in Silicon Valley. And I think there's lots of potential, even in these times of social distancing, where we can try to implement those changes. And now that we depend on technology more than ever, we also more than ever depend on artists to show us the way, and their capacity as futurists to anticipate a future that none of us can envision by ourselves. And so this is actually a time where artists excel at their crafts and in their capacities. So I think we can expect very, very interesting discussions in the art world, and an incredible productive time for creative minds.
So whenever there's a crisis, there's also an opportunity. And I know, of course, that you're working on a lot of projects, very exciting projects, this being one of them, the Open Salon, which has been made possible with these combined efforts of our guests, Washington, D.C. Ambassador Martin Weiss, Joseph Schwob, Sonja Schmer-Galunda, here Emanuel Pirker, and a big, big thank to all of you. Big thank to the Open Austria team. Felicitas did a fantastic job here as well. And also a big thank to the Open Austria members that were not here today. Georg Föhlinger was, of course, here, talked to us about the Austrian entrepreneurs, the general situation for businesses here, but then also a big shout out to Earl Schaffer, who's continuing to doing great work, particularly in the Go Silicon Valley initiative that is still up and running. Then also I want to thank Marlene Mautner. She's working also for us, and even though she could return home to Austria, is staying here, holding out, and wanted to continue working for Open Austria, as well as Mariana Bonecki for foreign trade investment into Austria, doing great work, conceptualizing with us many future initiatives and events. So big thank you to the entire team. You're going to see hopefully many initiatives from us in the coming weeks. Whatever the challenges are, we're up in business here at Open Austria, connecting and keeping to connect Austria and Silicon Valley, the Bay Area. Tremendous support from the community in these difficult times. And of course, we are here for the community in difficult times. So if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if there's anything we can do for you, whether it's whether you're from the world of the arts, whether you're from the world from business, from science, research, or if you're an Austrian citizen simply who has a lot of concerns, whether it's about your passport, whether it's about a visa, you're not an Austrian citizen, but you need a visa, talk to us or talk to our partners in Los Angeles, the Consulate General there, talk to Peter, our honorary consul there. And we will certainly, if we don't have the answer, we will certainly know how to direct you. So it's been really, really great to have you. Thank you so much for participating. If you had questions that we couldn't answer today, there's a very easy way to contact us. Contact at open-austria.com. We'll very soon have our next Open Salon. We're working on it, and we will let you know as soon as we know when it will be. This is an experiment for us as well. This has been our first Open Salon. Thank you very much for joining us. We will record this session. It's a webinar at Zoom and put it on the net. So if you missed some of the information, you can certainly review it. Thank you again. Felicitas. And I will now end the seminar. Bye-bye.